My doctor called saying, "You have 6 months to live." I told my family and they all cried. But later, I overheard my son and his wife planning how to split my house. That's when I decided to make a little change to my diagnosis. On the day of my final goodbye, I walked in perfectly healthy and said something that made them all freeze. Subscribe to the channel, leave your like and comment from which part of the world you are watching. Get comfortable and relax. Let's begin. The words hung in the air between Dr. Thorne and me, a sharp, clinical verdict. 6 months, Eleanor, perhaps less. I did not cry. I did not gasp. My eyes remained fixed on the geometric pattern of the office carpet, a series of gray and blue squares. I noted how one corner was slightly frayed. The world did not dissolve. It simply sharpened into unbearable focus on that worn patch of fabric. My hands rested flat on my knees, the skin thin over the bones. I felt the weight of every one of my 68 years settle into my joints at that moment. I thanked him for his candor. My voice sounded foreign to me, calm and polite, the voice of a patron checking out a library book. I scheduled a follow-up appointment I knew I would likely cancel. I walked out into the bright, indifferent afternoon, the sun feeling like an intrusion. The drive home was a series of automatic actions. Turn the key, signal, brake. My house, a sturdy colonial with a wraparound porch I'd painted myself a decade prior, waited for me. It did not look like a dying woman's home. It looked alive, demanding care. I called my son, Marcus. "I need you to come over, bring Chloe, it's important." I used the tone I'd used when his father passed, steady, inviting no argument. He arrived within the hour, his wife Chloe a step behind him, her expression already arranged into one of concerned inquiry. I sat them down in the living room on the sofa where we'd opened Christmas presents for 30 years. I delivered the news as plainly as Dr. Thorne had given it to me. The doctor says I have 6 months left. The reaction was immediate, dramatic. Marcus's face crumpled. "Mom, no." He crossed the room in 2 strides and pulled me into an embrace. I could feel the genuine tremor in his shoulders. Over his shoulder, I saw Chloe press her fingers to her lips, her eyes glistening. "Ellie, I'm so sorry," she breathed, joining the hug. For several minutes, we were a knot of shared grief. I allowed myself to be comforted. I absorbed their tears, their promises to be there, their declarations of love. A part of me, the mother, was deeply touched. The other part, the librarian, was merely observing, cataloging the moment. They insisted on staying. Marcus ordered food. Chloe fussed in the kitchen, making tea she knew I preferred. The performance of family care was executed with precision. As dusk fell, the exhaustion, both real and emotional, began to press on me. I pleaded fatigue and retreated to my bedroom upstairs, seeking the silence my own thoughts demanded. But sleep was impossible. The house, usually a shell of comforting quiet, felt charged with an unfamiliar energy. After an hour of lying still, I rose. I needed water. I opened my bedroom door slowly. A wedge of light from the kitchen cut across the dark hallway floor. I heard their voices, low but clear, carried up the stairwell. I moved without sound to the top of the stairs. I did not intend to eavesdrop. I simply stopped walking. "It's terrible, of course it's terrible," Chloe was saying, her voice stripped of its earlier sympathetic warmth. It was analytical, crisp. "But we have to be practical, Marcus. We have to think ahead." "Don't, Chloe, not tonight." Marcus's voice was thick, weary. "Tonight is exactly when we need to think. Emotion clouds judgment. The market is hot right now. A property like this, in this condition, in this neighborhood, we're looking at a significant asset." My hand found the banister, the wood smooth under my palm. I had sanded it myself. "It's Mom's house," Marcus said, but the protest was weak, hollow. "And it will be an empty house in 6 months. Then what? We let it sit? We pay the taxes? We let cousins start circling?" I could picture her leaning against my kitchen counter, one hand on her hip. "We list it. We use the equity. Our mortgage is choking us, Marcus. This is a solution, a tragic one, but a solution. Should we talk to her about renovations? Before? To increase the value? The question from my son was a whisper. It was not a question of morality, but of strategy. Maybe. As-is might be faster, but updated commands a premium. We should get a contractor in to walk through, discreetly. I stood on the landing, a statue in the dark. The cold that seeped into my bones had nothing to do with illness. It was a clean, sharp cold, clarifying. The tears I had not shed in the doctor's office did not come now either. Something else crystallized. The dramatic embraces, the performed grief. They had been for the diagnosis, not for me. The diagnosis was a trigger for a financial calculation. My home, my life within these walls, the gardens I'd tended, the memories in every scratch on the floor, they were being measured in square footage and market trends. I heard the clink of a wine glass. A cabinet door closed. Their conversation shifted to the logistics of Marcus taking time off work. I retreated back into my bedroom, closing the door with a soft, definitive click. I did not get the water. I sat on the edge of my bed, looking at the moonlit shape of my dressing table. The shock was gone, burned away by that cold clarity. The grief from my own imagined end twisted and hardened into something else. A profound disappointment, a deep, quiet anger. They saw an expiration date and an asset. They did not see me. They did not see the woman who raised a son alone in this house, who built a life of quiet dignity and purpose. They saw a problem to be managed and an opportunity to be seized. I replayed the kitchen conversation in my head, the tone, the specific words, significant asset, listed, contractor. Each one was a tile in a mosaic of betrayal. This was not the action of people overcome by grief making poor choices. This was a calm, early assessment of an inheritance. They had started the clock the moment I stopped speaking. I lay back down. The weariness was now entirely real. But my mind was not still. It was turning, assessing, planning with a focus I had not felt in years. The performance I had witnessed downstairs was instructive. It demonstrated how easily facts could be framed, how emotions could be weaponized or feigned. If they could perform grief, what else was I capable of performing? The 6-month sentence was no longer a death knell. It had become a time frame, a boundary, and within a boundary, one can construct anything. A plan began as a faint ember in the dark of that room, fueled not by malice but by a resolute, icy need to teach a lesson. They thought they were preparing for an end. I decided then and there that I would be the one to define what that end would be. The disappointment settled into a kind of grim determination. I closed my eyes. I would sleep now. Tomorrow I would begin. The resolve that formed in the dark of my bedroom did not waver with the morning light. It solidified. I dressed with care, selecting a simple linen dress, the same one I might wear to a book club meeting. I applied a slight touch of lipstick. Appearances, I was learning, were a distinct layer of reality, separate from truth. I needed to project normalcy, a woman proceeding with the mundane tasks of a terminal diagnosis. My first task, however, was not mundane. I called Dr. Thorne's office and said I needed to discuss palliative care options. The receptionist's voice was gently sympathetic, squeezing me in between appointments. The waiting room felt different this time. The frayed carpet square held no fascination. I saw it now as a piece of set dressing, part of the stage where life-altering pronouncements were made. I was no longer a passive audience member. I was here to rewrite the script. Dr. Thorne greeted me with a somber professionalism. Eleanor. I'm glad you came. It's important we discuss next steps, comfort measures. He gestured for me to sit in the same chair. I remained standing for a moment, then sat, placing my purse neatly on my lap. I'm not here to discuss next steps, Robert. I used his first name, a deliberate shift. I am here to discuss a hypothetical scenario. His eyebrows lifted slightly. He closed the folder on his desk. Go on. Hypothetically, I began, my voice level, if a patient of yours discovered that her family's primary response to her prognosis was not grief, but a swift and calculating assessment of her material worth, what would you advise? Should she die disappointed, or should she use the time she has left to correct their perspective? He leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. His gaze was sharp, assessing. That is a profound hypothetical. The ethical considerations are complex. Counseling would be the standard recommendation. Counseling requires willing participants, I said. These hypothetical individuals are not willing. They are busy. They are measuring curtains. I paused, letting the implication hang. You gave me 6 months, a finite resource, time. Hypothetically, what if we use that time not as a countdown but as a classroom? What if the lesson wasn't about dying but about what makes a life worth inheriting? He was silent for a long moment. You're talking about a deception. I am talking about a demonstration, a practical lesson. They have already begun their performance. I simply wish to direct the final act. I looked directly at him. I heard them, Robert. Last night, in my kitchen, they were discussing listing my house, the value of renovations before my body could even grow cold, my son's voice. A flicker of something, anger, disgust, passed behind his professional demeanor. He had known me for 15 years. He had treated my husband at the end. He knew the character of my life. What exactly are you proposing? His voice was lower now, curious. I propose we let the diagnosis stand, publicly. We let the 6-month prognosis be the accepted fact. You will be my sole confidant. In return, I will perform the appropriate decline, and at a chosen moment before the end of that time frame, we will reveal the truth, not privately, but publicly, to the entire family. A revelation that the dying woman was, in fact, perfectly healthy, that their actions were observed and judged in light of a fiction they were all too eager to believe. He let out a long breath. Eleanor, that is extreme. The emotional fallout could be severe. It could destroy your family. It is already destroyed, I stated. The words were cold, clean. It is destroyed by greed and disrespect. This is not about destruction. It is about excavation. To see what, if anything, remains beneath the rubble. If nothing does, then I will know. And I will have my answer before I am truly gone. I will rewrite my will accordingly. If something does remain, perhaps it can be rebuilt on honest ground. He stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the parking lot. My medical license, my oath. You will have broken no oath. You will have provided compassionate care to a patient navigating a terminal diagnosis. The fact that the diagnosis was a shared fiction for a therapeutic purpose, is that so different from a placebo? The intended outcome is health. Not my physical health, but the health of my family's soul, if such a thing can be salvaged. He turned to look at me. A faint, reluctant smile touched his lips. You have clearly thought this through. I am a librarian. Research and structure are my skills. I allowed a small, tight smile in return. I need you to be my anchor to reality, to confirm the story, to be the unimpeachable medical authority, and when the time comes, to walk into the room and declare me fit as a fiddle. He walked back to his desk and sat down. He opened my file, looked at the test results that indicated nothing more sinister than mild arthritis and excellent cholesterol. The test results are real. They show no life-threatening condition. I never explicitly said you were dying, Eleanor. I said the symptoms and markers you reported, given your age, could suggest a progressive decline with a tentative time frame. It was a conditional prognosis. I nodded. A conditional prognosis upon which they have already begun to act. All I am asking is that we do not correct their conditional assumption. We let it run its course. He closed the folder again. I could lose everything. You will not, I said, with more certainty than I felt, because I will never reveal your willing participation until after I am truly dead, if I ever do. To the world, you were my diligent, misled doctor, and I was a desperate, perhaps slightly unhinged, old woman who concocted a wild scheme. You will be as shocked as everyone else. Your only sin will be having a patient who lied to you about her symptoms, which I assure you I will do convincingly. He studied me for a full minute. The clock on the wall ticked. You are asking me to lie. I am asking you to participate in a lesson, a drastic one. For a family you have watched for years, you knew James. You know what that house represents. My voice for the first time held a faint tremor. I controlled it. He sighed, a sound of surrender. What are your first steps? The tension in my shoulders eased a fraction. I will begin the performance. I will cancel my regular engagements. I will ask Marcus for help with legal paperwork, my will, my affairs. I will let small things slide, the garden, correspondence. You will see me here periodically, looking progressively more weary. We will discuss my symptoms, fatigue, loss of appetite, as if they are real. You will note them in my file. And the endpoint? A gathering, a living wake of sorts. I will tell them I want a final goodbye while I can still appreciate it. Everyone will be there. That is when the curtain falls. He nodded slowly, a director considering a bold production. I will need detailed notes, your symptoms, their progression, to maintain consistency. Of course. He extended his hand across the desk, not as a doctor, but as a co-conspirator. Then hypothetically, Mrs. Beaumont, I believe your treatment plan has merit. It is highly unconventional, but the potential therapeutic value for the familial unit is intriguing. I shook his hand. The pact was sealed. There was no warmth in it, only a shared understanding of a necessary deception. Thank you, Robert. I left his office not as a patient, but as a general leaving a war council. The outside air felt different. It was no longer the air of a condemned woman, but of an architect. My first move was a phone call. I sat in my car and dialed the number for my book club coordinator, Helen. Helen, it's Ellie. I allowed my voice to soften, to acquire a faint, breathy quality. I'm so sorry, but I'm going to have to step away from the club for a while. Yes, it's health-related. Nothing to be overly concerned about, just some exhausting tests and such. I need to conserve my energy. You understand. Thank you, dear. I ended the call. The performance had begun. I started the car and drove home, already composing the next line in my head. I would call Marcus this evening. I would ask him, my voice tinged with a fragile sadness, to help his old mother with her will. It was time, I would say, to get things in order. I knew exactly how he would interpret the request. It was the first brick in the path I was laying for them, a path that looked like a gentle slope toward an inevitable end, but which led, instead, to a mirror. I called Marcus that evening. I waited until 7, when I knew he would be home from work, likely settling in with the news. I made my voice lighter, thinner, as if it were traveling a greater distance from my body. Marcus, it's your mother. I allowed a small, deliberate pause. I was thinking about things today. After our talk, I don't want to be a burden, not in any way. But there are some practical matters. My will. It's the old one from when your father was still with us. I should update it. Could you help me with that? I find the legal language so confusing now. His response was immediate, coated in a layer of somber duty. Of course, Mom. Of course. Don't even think about it being a burden. That's what I'm here for. I can come by this weekend. We'll go through it. Thank you, dear. That would ease my mind. I infused the words with a fragile gratitude. When Saturday arrived, I prepared for the role. I did not put on my usual bright lipstick. I wore a simple, slightly faded house dress. I left my silver curls less meticulously arranged. I placed a box of tissues discreetly on the coffee table, a prop for anticipated emotion. Marcus arrived alone. He carried a new leather-bound portfolio, a tool for the executor. His embrace was careful, as if I might break. "How are you feeling today?" "A little tired," I said, waving a hand vaguely. "Some days are better than others. Let's not dwell on it. The papers are on the dining table." We sat. I had laid out the old will, a simple document leaving everything to Marcus, along with some blank sheets of paper and a pen. I let my hand tremble slightly as I pushed the old will toward him. "This is what needs changing. I have some ideas, but you're the practical one. What should we consider?" He opened the portfolio, avoiding my eyes for a moment. "Well, the main asset is the house. We need to think about title transfer, probate avoidance. Maybe a living trust would be more efficient. It can save a lot in taxes and avoid delays." His voice was calm, professional. He was not discussing my home. He was discussing an estate. "I see," I said softly, looking down at my hands. "A trust? That sounds complicated." "I can handle it. I'll find a good estate attorney. A colleague recommended one." He was already making notes. "We should also make a list of your personal effects, jewelry, artwork, for distribution, to avoid disagreements later." My wedding ring felt heavy on my finger. "Yes, that's wise. Your Aunt Clara always admired my mother's porcelain vase. Things like that." "Exactly." He looked up, his expression one of gentle efficiency. "It's hard, Mom, but it's responsible. We want everything to be clear." I nodded, playing the part of the overwhelmed, grateful mother. "You're so good to do this. It's a weight off me." We spent an hour sketching vague outlines. He promised to have preliminary documents drawn up. When he left, the portfolio under his arm, he kissed my cheek. "Try to rest, okay?" The moment the door closed, my posture straightened. The faint tremor in my hands stopped. I cleared the table, my movements crisp. The performance had been successful. He had seen exactly what he needed to see. A woman acquiescing to the inevitable, willingly handing over the reins of her demise. The next phase was environmental. My garden had always been my signature. Every neighbor knew Eleanor Beaumont's roses, her orderly rows of tomatoes and herbs, the explosion of zinnias by the front walk. To let it go would be a public statement. I did not stop caring for it entirely. That would be suspiciously abrupt. Instead, I became selective. I deadheaded the roses but left the spent blooms of the hydrangeas to turn brown and papery. I watered the tomatoes but ignored the encroaching weeds around the basil. I allowed the lawn to grow just a half-inch longer than my usual standard before mowing it. The change was subtle, a gradual softening of edges, a slight air of dignified neglect. Mrs. Gable from next door noticed. She called over the fence one afternoon. "Everything all right, Ellie? Your impatiens are looking a bit thirsty." I offered her a wan smile, leaning on the fence post as if for support. "Just a bit behind, Evelyn. The heat takes it out of me more this year. Don't worry, they'll bounce back." The implication was clear. I would not bounce back. She nodded, her face folding into sympathetic lines, and promised to bring by some squash from her own garden. The cancellation of my weekly standing engagements continued. I called the volunteer coordinator at the local library and resigned from my Thursday afternoon shift, citing unspecified health issues. I let my newspaper subscription lapse and mentioned to the delivery boy that I probably wouldn't be needing it much longer. Word began to travel in the quiet channels of a small community. My appointments with Dr. Thorne became rehearsals. I would report symptoms. A lingering fatigue that made reading difficult, a lack of interest in cooking, a general feeling of slowing down. He would note them with solemn gravity, occasionally offering a genuine piece of medical advice for maintaining strength. Our conversations were a blend of fiction and reality, a dance where we both knew the steps. "Are you experiencing any pain?" he asked during one visit. "Not physical pain, Robert," I answered, looking out the window. It's more of a pervasive ache of conclusion. He wrote that down. It was a good line. It sounded like something a dying woman would say. At home, alone, I was neither tired nor aching. I was busy. I began a different sort of project. In a locked drawer of my desk, I started a journal. Not a diary of feelings, but a log. Dates, times, quotes. July 12th, Marcus mentioned probate avoidance 3 times in conversation. July 19th, Chloe called, asked if I had appraisals for the silver flatware, said she could store it safely for me. July 25th, notice Marcus examining the foundation of the porch, tapping the siding. I documented their encroachment. It was my evidence. The cold anger I felt was a steady fuel, but it was contained, directed. It was the energy I used to meticulously not weed the flower beds, to deliberately forget a friend's birthday, to let my famous peach cobbler go unmade for the summer picnic. The facade was settling into place. From the outside, Eleanor Beaumont was fading, gracefully and sadly, making room for the future. On the inside, in the quiet, well-ordered center of myself, I was more present and focused than I had been in years. I was building a lesson, brick by deliberate brick. Every sigh they heard, every untended plant they saw, every piece of paperwork they encouraged, was another brick. They were so busy measuring the dimensions of my legacy, they didn't notice they were constructing the walls of their own confrontation. The frequency of their visits increased, but the nature of them shifted. Where before there had been a pretense of checking on my health, now the focus was unmistakably on the property. They came on a Tuesday evening, unannounced, which was itself a change in protocol. I was in the living room, a book open but unread on my lap, a shawl draped around my shoulders. Another deliberate prop. "Mom, we were in the neighborhood," Marcus said, his kiss landing on my cheek. Chloe followed, her eyes performing a swift inventory of the room as she entered. "I brought you some bone broth from that new organic place," Chloe said, placing a sleek container in my refrigerator. She did not ask if I wanted it. "You need to keep your strength up." Her tone was nurse-like, but her attention was elsewhere. She walked back into the living room, her hand trailing along the back of the velvet sofa, her fingers testing the fabric. "This has held up so well, such good quality." "It's seen a lot of living," I said, my voice softly distant. "Exactly, solid pieces. They don't make them like this anymore." She said it as an appraiser would, noting provenance and durability. She moved to the built-in bookshelves, her gaze not on the titles but on the shelves themselves. "These are real mahogany, beautiful grain." Marcus stood somewhat awkwardly by the fireplace. "How are you feeling, Mom? Really?" "Tired, son. Just tired. The days seem longer." I offered him the scripted line, and he accepted it with a sympathetic nod. Chloe turned from the bookshelves. "You know, Ellie, all this space, it must be a lot to manage now. Have you thought about simplifying? We could help you go through some things, start the process. It's overwhelming to leave it all for later." Her smile was benevolent, her words a velvet knife. "We could take some boxes to our place for storage, the good china, your photo albums, to keep them safe." The mention of the photo albums was a calculated touch. They were not valuable, except to me. She was framing theft as custodianship. "It's a kind thought, Chloe. I'll consider it," I murmured, pulling the shawl tighter. Marcus seized the opening. It would make things easier later. A less emotional process for everyone if we do it gradually, together. "I understand." I let my eyes close for a moment, as if fatigued by the mere concept. "Perhaps next week." The following weekend they came again, this time with a purpose. Chloe carried a tablet computer. "Ellie, I was looking at comps. Comparable homes, in the neighborhood. The market is incredible right now," I showed Marcus. "The potential in this house is just stunning." She swiped the screen and brought the device to me. showing me pictures of other houses, their interiors staged and sterile. See? With some strategic updates, this place could command a premium. Nothing major. Fresh paint, obviously. Updating the kitchen hardware. Maybe refinishing these floors. She tapped her heel on the oak plank. Light and bright is the trend. I looked at the images, then around my living room, at the slight wear on the armchair where James always sat, at the faint, sun-bleached patch on the rug where our Christmas tree stood for 30 years. It sounds like a lot of work. Not for you, Marcus said quickly. For us. We'd handle everything. We were thinking. Maybe we get a contractor in just to give us a walkthrough, a professional eye, to see what's worth doing and what isn't. So we have a plan. A plan, I repeated. For the future, Chloe clarified, her voice sweet. It's always good to have a plan. I consented. I told them it was sensible, that I appreciated their foresight. Inside, the log in my desk drawer gained a new, stark entry. August 3rd, proposed contractor walkthrough. A plan for the future. The contractor, a friend of Chloe's, arrived on a Thursday morning. His name was Dave. He shook my hand with a practiced sympathy before pulling out a laser measure and a clipboard. I observed from the sidelines a ghost in my own home. Marcus and Chloe followed him like eager students. Solid bones, Dave said, rapping a knuckle on a wall. Open up this wall here to the kitchen. You've got yourself a great room. Huge value add. See? Chloe whispered to Marcus, though I could hear her. I told you. They moved through the house. Dave noted the dated but serviceable plumbing. He admired the original character, but suggested modernizing the bathrooms. Chloe asked specific questions about return on investment for granite countertops versus quartz. Marcus asked about the cost of replacing the roof, though it was only 10 years old. I stood in the doorway of my bedroom as Dave gave it a cursory glance. Good size. Closets are small by today's standards, but that's expected. He did not see the room where I had nursed Marcus through childhood fevers, where James had drawn the curtains every morning for 40 years. He saw square footage and closet space. After he left with promises to email a detailed estimate, Chloe was radiant with calculation. It's all doable, Marcus. And the numbers he mentioned, even after renovation costs, the profit margin is significant. We could practically pay off our mortgage. Marcus looked at me, a flicker of something, shame perhaps, crossing his face before it was smoothed away by practicality. It's just an estimate, Mom, just information. I understand, I said. Knowledge is power. I meant it in a way they could not possibly grasp. That night, after they had left, I did not feel the cold anger. I felt a solidified certainty. Their actions were no longer whispers in a kitchen. They were open, collaborative ventures. They were measuring my life in linear feet and profit margins. The last veil of pretense had fallen. Chloe no longer bothered to hide her calculations behind a mask of care. Marcus had surrendered fully to the logic of liquidation. I went to my desk and unlocked the drawer. The journal was growing thick with entries. I added the day's events, quoting their phrases about value adds and profit margins. Then, on a fresh page, I began a new list, not of their transgressions, but of my own relatives, cousins, a sister-in-law, a niece who always sent a card on my birthday, the great-nephews who barely knew me. I needed to know the full audience for the lesson. The performance was no longer a private rehearsal. The stage was being set, and soon I would need to sell tickets to the final act. Their greed had become my script, and every comment about hardware and comps was a line I would throw back at them in a clear, strong voice in a room full of witnesses. The list of names was complete. It was time to move from observation to action. I needed to formalize the timeline, to create an event that would serve as the container for the revelation. A simple family dinner would not suffice. It needed to be an occasion, something that demanded attendance and carried its own weight of significance. The concept came to me with cold clarity, a living wake, a final goodbye with the guest of honor still present. It was macabre enough to be believable, theatrical enough to ensure a full house. I called Marcus and Chloe. I made my voice a little weaker, a little more wistful than in our previous conversations. "I've been thinking," I began, pausing for effect. "All this talk of plans and papers, it feels so cold. I don't want my last months to be only about the dispersal of things. I want to see everyone. I want to feel the family around me one last time, while I can still appreciate it, while I can still enjoy a piece of pie and hear the laughter." "What are you saying, Mom?" Marcus asked. I could hear the caution in his voice. "I want to have a gathering, here, a sort of celebration of life, but with the life still in it. A final goodbye party. For me." I let the sentence hang, allowing the sentiment to resonate, or at least to be processed. There was a silence on the line. I imagined the look exchanged between them. "Mom, that's a beautiful idea," Chloe said, her voice suddenly warm, dripping with performative support. "But are you sure you're up for it? The strain?" "That's precisely why," I said. "If I wait until I'm not up for it, it will be too late. I want to do this on my terms. I want to say my own goodbyes. I'll need your help, of course, with the invitations, the food." "Of course, anything," Marcus said, but his tone was strained. I could decipher the calculations running behind his words, the disruption, the cost, the delay to their plans. "When were you thinking?" "Soon, in a few weeks. The weather should still be nice. We can use the garden." "We'll make it happen," Chloe declared, already taking managerial control. "A send-off fit for you, Ellie. We'll handle everything. You just rest." That was the first hurdle cleared. They had accepted the premise. Now I needed to control the guest list. I told them I would handle the invitations personally. "It will give me something to do," I said. "A pleasant task. I'll write them out by hand. It feels more proper." I purchased a box of simple cream-colored stationery. At my dining table, in the afternoon light, I began to write. Each name was a deliberate choice. I started with my brother, Albert, in Florida. His wife had passed, and he was forgetful, but he would come if his daughter brought him. I wrote to my niece, Letitia, a warm-hearted nurse in Chicago who called me every month without fail. I included cousins I hadn't seen in years, old neighbors who were like family, Marcus's godparents. I wanted a cross-section, the genuinely grieving, the dutiful, the curious, and the potentially avaricious. I needed witnesses with varied perspectives. The responses began to trickle in, first as phone calls. Letitia called, her voice thick with tears. "Aunt Ellie, no, I'm coming. I'm booking a flight right now." Her sorrow was a clean, sharp pain in my chest, a reminder of what real loss sounded like. My brother Albert's daughter, Kara, called on his behalf. "Dad's confused, but he insists on coming. He keeps talking about your wedding day. He wants to see you." That, too, was genuine. Then there were others. Cousin Gerald, who had once tried to borrow a large sum from James, replied with a lengthy email expressing shock, then segueing smoothly into questions about estate planning and offering his services as a financial advisor. I noted his name. I invited a few close friends from my library days. Their responses were pure, unadulterated sadness. They offered to bring food, to help clean, to sit with me. Their kindness was a balm and a gauge against which to measure the rest. Marcus and Chloe checked in regularly, their focus entirely logistical. "How many RSVPs so far? We need a final head count for catering. Should we rent chairs? What about a canopy for the garden in case of rain? Do you want us to start boxing up some of the more fragile decor to prevent accidents during the party?" That last question from Chloe was particularly telling. She was already safeguarding her future assets from the clumsiness of mourners. I answered all their questions with placid agreement. Yes to the canopy, no to the chairs, we had enough, and no to the boxing. "I want the house to feel lived in, right until the end," I told her. "Let things be." The date was set for 3 weeks hence. The house, my stage, was now booked for a performance. I felt a strange calm settle over me. The preparatory work was done. The actors were being summoned. My role was rehearsed. In my private moments, I would practice the shift, the droop of the shoulders, the slow, careful walk, the hand that slightly trembled, lifting a teacup. In the mirror, I watched my eyes. They were the one thing I could not fully disguise. They held no fear, no resignation. They were watching, waiting, utterly clear. I made one more phone call to Dr. Thorne. The invitations have been sent. The performance is scheduled for the 14th. I have it on my calendar, he said, his voice dry. I'll be there, fashionably late, as discussed. Fashionably late, I confirmed, just in time for the finale. Are you ready, Eleanor? I looked out at my garden, at the intentionally wilting impatiens, at the lawn that needed cutting. I have never been more ready, Robert. They have written their parts perfectly. All I have to do is give them their cue. The morning of the 13th arrived, the day before the gathering. The house was quiet, but it was the quiet before a storm of a different kind. Today was for dressing the set. I began with a thorough cleaning, not to impress, but to create a specific atmosphere. I wanted the house to feel loved, but tinged with melancholy, a museum of a life soon to be concluded. I dusted every surface, but I left one framed photo of James and me on the beach, slightly askew. I vacuumed the rugs, but I allowed a single, obvious thread of lint to remain on the dark blue hallway runner. I polished the dining table to a shine, then placed my grandmother's lace tablecloth over it, a piece usually reserved for Christmas. It was yellowed with age at the folds, a visual cue of tradition and passing time. My most important prop required fabrication. At my desk, I took out a sheet of my personal stationery. I wrote a date from 2 weeks prior. In a script that mimicked the rushed hand of a medical professional, I wrote, "Follow-up. No significant change. Prognosis remains 4 to 6 months. Symptoms manageable. Continue palliative plan. R. Thorne." I deliberately smudged the R slightly. I folded the note twice and carried it to the living room. I lifted the cushion of my reading chair, placed the note halfway underneath, and let the corner peek out. It was a risk, but a calculated one. If found, it would reinforce the narrative. I doubted anyone would look, but the possibility was part of the stagecraft. Next, I selected my favorite shawl, a vibrant blue paisley my son had given me years ago, before the calculations had begun. I had worn it often. I draped it carefully over the back of the velvet armchair, arranging it so one end pooled artistically on the seat. It looked both familiar and abandoned, a signature item left behind. In the kitchen, I began preparing food, not the elaborate spread for the party. Chloe had hired a caterer for that, but small personal touches. I baked a simple lemon loaf, a recipe everyone associated with me. The scent would fill the house, a sensory anchor of normalcy. I left it on the counter, uncovered, on a porcelain plate. I wanted people to see it to note that Eleanor was still baking, but also to sense it might be for the last time. My final preparation was personal. I selected my outfit for the next day, a simple, elegant navy dress, comfortable flats. I laid it on my bed. Then I practiced. I stood before my full-length mirror and let my shoulders slump. I allowed a slight, unsteady waver as I took a step. I rehearsed the slow, careful lowering into a chair, the hand that reached for a phantom teacup with a delicate tremor. I worked on my gaze, distant, softened, accepting. I practiced until the movements felt natural, until I could summon the frailty on command. In the afternoon, I drove to a small park near Dr. Thorne's office. We had agreed to meet there, away from potential observation. He was already on a bench when I arrived, watching ducks on a pond. "The final briefing," he said as I sat beside him. He kept his eyes forward. "Everything is ready. The note is planted. The shawl is out. The house tells the story I want it to tell." He nodded. "My role is simple. I arrive approximately 45 minutes after the party's start time. I express my regrets for being late. A last-minute house call. I mingle briefly, accept condolences on my difficult case. Then, when you signal, I will be ready. The signal will be me asking for quiet to say a few words. When I stand, I will begin my final speech. That is when you should move to a position where everyone can see you. When I reveal the fabrication, I will look to you. You will confirm it, calmly, medically. I will say that your most recent tests, completed just days ago, show no progressive illness, that you are in remarkable health for your age, that the original prognosis was based on presented symptoms that have, thankfully, not manifested as feared. He turned to look at me. It's the truth, after all. It is. I watched a duck dive beneath the murky water. Are you nervous? Apprehensive, he admitted. But not about the medical facts, about the human fallout. You're lighting a fuse in the middle of your family, Eleanor. The fuse was already lit, I said. I am merely directing the explosion away from my legacy and toward their conscience, where it belongs. We sat in silence for a few minutes. Then he asked, "And afterward? Your will?" "Is rewritten. The house and the bulk of my estate are left in a trust for the establishment of a community garden and a literacy program at the library. Marcus and Chloe are left a small symbolic sum. The rest of the family receives personal items I've designated. The new will is with my lawyer. It will be read formally later, but I will summarize its contents tomorrow. It is the consequence." He let out a long breath. A brutal lesson. A necessary one. If they learn from it, the will can be changed again. That will be their choice after the lesson. I stood up, my movement now crisp and sure. "Thank you, Robert, for being an ally in this." "I hope it brings you peace," he said, and he meant it. "It already has," I replied, and it was true. The planning, the control, had replaced the hurt with purpose. I returned home. The lemon loaf scent still hung in the air. I walked through each room, checking my handiwork, the slightly askew photo, the lint on the runner, the folded note peeking from under the cushion, the shawl on the chair. It was perfect. The stage was dressed for a tragedy that would not occur. That evening, Marcus called. "All set for tomorrow, Mom. The caterers will be there at 2 to set up. Chloe and I will come by at noon to help you get ready." "I'll be waiting," I said, my voice softening into its practiced, weary tone. "I'm looking forward to seeing everyone." After I hung up, I went to my desk and took out the journal. I did not write an entry. I reviewed the catalog of betrayals, the quotes, the dates. Then I closed it and locked the drawer. I would not need it again. Its contents were memorized. They were the foundation of the speech I would deliver. I went to bed early. I did not read. I lay in the dark, running through the sequence of events in my mind, the arrivals, the subdued greetings, the toasts, the performance of decline, then the moment, the straightening of the spine, the change in my voice, the words I would say. I visualized every face, every possible reaction. I felt a calm, steel-cold certainty. The set was dressed. The actors were en route. The director was ready. All that remained was for the curtain to rise. The doorbell rang at exactly 2 o'clock. The caterers, efficient and silent in their black uniforms, began their work, laying out platters of cold salmon, roasted vegetables, and delicate pastries. By 2:30, the first guests arrived. My niece Letitia was first, sweeping through the door and pulling me into a hug so tight it threatened to crumple my carefully maintained posture of frailty. Her eyes were red-rimmed. "Aunt Ellie," she whispered into my shoulder, "you look beautiful." I patted her back, my own eyes dry. "It's so good to see you, Letty." The house began to fill. My brother Albert arrived, leaning on his daughter Kara's arm. He peered at me, his eyes clouded with confusion and what I recognized as real grief. "Ellie, you're having a party?" he asked. "A little one, Albie, for family." He nodded slowly, his hand reaching out to grip mine. His skin was papery, a mirror of the one I was pretending to have. James would have liked this, he said, and the simplicity of the statement, the genuine memory of my husband, almost breached my defenses. Almost. Chloe and Marcus had arrived at noon as promised. Chloe had taken charge instantly, a general in a silk blouse. She directed traffic, adjusted flower arrangements, and kept a constant, evaluating smile on her face. Marcus hovered, pouring drinks, his laughter a bit too loud, his joviality strained. He watched me when he thought I wasn't looking, his gaze assessing my stamina. I knew, not my comfort. The air in the house grew thick. It was a mixture of perfume, food smells, and the unmistakable scent of forced sentiment. Conversations formed small, shifting clusters. Some were genuine, old friends sharing memories of me, of James, their voices soft and nostalgic. Others were threaded with a different current. From my perch on the velvet armchair, positioned like a throne at the edge of the living room, I observed it all. Cousin Gerald cornered Marcus near the bookshelves. I could not hear the words, but I saw the familiar gesture, a hand on the shoulder, a leaning in, the serious nod. A financial proposition, no doubt, a sympathetic offer to help manage the transition. Chloe circulated like a socialite, but her commentary to various relatives was curated. To my old neighbor, she said, "We just want to honor Ellie's legacy properly. The house is such a big part of that." To my library friend, she mused, "It's a lot of space for one person, of course, but it has such potential." I accepted every hug, every clasped hand. I nodded and smiled, a small, tired smile. I allowed my voice to grow softer as the afternoon wore on. I accepted a plate of food from Marcus, but only picked at it, leaving most untouched. I asked Letitia to fetch my blue shawl from the chair, and I wrapped it around my shoulders, a visible symbol of my need for warmth, for comfort. Toast began. Marcus cleared his throat, holding up a glass of wine. His hand shook slightly. "To Mom," he said, his voice cracking on cue. "A woman of strength and grace. We will carry your love with us always." People murmured agreement, raising their glasses. Chloe added, "To Ellie, who built this beautiful home and beautiful family. We will cherish it all." The word cherish landed with a heavy material weight. My friend Agnes from the book club stood, her voice sincere and trembling. To Eleanor, who taught me the value of a quiet mind and a good story. I will miss our talks more than I can say. Each tribute was a data point. The heartfelt ones fortified me. The calculated ones fueled the cold engine inside my chest. I kept my eyes downcast, my hands folded in my lap over the shawl, playing my part. Dr. Thorne arrived as planned around 3:15. He made a quiet entrance, accepting a glass of seltzer. He moved to my side first, taking my hand in a professional, sympathetic grip. "Eleanor, how are you holding up?" "As well as can be expected, Robert," I murmured, giving his hand a slight, deliberate squeeze, our prearranged signal that all was proceeding. He nodded and moved into the crowd. I watched as several people approached him, speaking in low, respectful tones. He responded with grave nods, playing his role of the caring, burdened physician. The party reached a sort of peak. The initial burst of emotion had settled into a steady hum of conversation, punctuated by occasional laughter that felt too bright for the occasion and was quickly hushed. The sunlight through the windows began to slant, casting long shadows across the floor I had polished. I felt the weight of every eye that glanced my way, full of pity, curiosity, or anticipation. It was time. The tension in the room was a taut wire. I had to pluck it. I caught Marcus's eye and gave a small, weary wave. He came over immediately, crouching beside my chair. "You need to lie down, Mom?" I shook my head slowly. "No, son, but I would like to say a few words. To everyone. Before I get too tired." He looked relieved, I think, that I was initiating the closing act. "Of course. Let me get everyone's attention." He stood and raised his voice. "Everyone? If I could have your attention, Mom would like to say a few words." The conversations died away in waves, chairs shifted. People turned toward me, their faces arranged in masks of attentive sadness. Chloe moved to stand beside Marcus, slipping her arm through his, a picture of united support. Letitia stood near the front, a tissue pressed to her lips. Dr. Thorne positioned himself at the back of the room, near the archway to the dining room, where he had a clear view. The silence was absolute, heavy with the expectation of a final, poignant farewell. I could hear the faint tick of the grandfather clock in the hall. I took a slow, visibly deep breath. I placed my hands on the arms of the chair, as if gathering strength. I began to push myself up, allowing a slight tremor, leaning heavily on the chair for support. A collective, almost imperceptible lean forward occurred in the room. This was the moment they had all come for. The last words. I got to my feet. I did not straighten fully yet. I kept my head slightly bowed, the shawl draped around my shoulders. I looked out at the sea of expectant, mournful faces, my family. I let the silence stretch for one more second, a final beat of the performance. Then I began. I let the silence stretch for one more second, a final beat of the performance. Then I began. "Thank you," I said, my voice initially soft, carrying the expected fragile tone. I kept my eyes on my hands, still gripping the chair. "Thank you all for coming today, for taking the time to be here, in this house, with me." I paused, letting the conventional opening settle. I could feel the room's collective breath held in sympathy. I lifted my head. My gaze traveled slowly across the faces before me, but I did not see them individually yet. I was centering myself. "When Dr. Thorne told me I had 6 months to live," I continued, my voice gaining a subtle, firmer thread, "I was, of course, devastated. I thought of all I would miss. I thought of this family." I saw Chloe give Marcus's arm a comforting squeeze. Letitia wiped a tear. I called my son. I gave him the news. And the reaction I received, the tears, the embraces, it touched me deeply. I let my eyes rest on Marcus. He offered a pained, loving smile. It gave me comfort, or so I believed. I shifted my weight, not with frailty, but with purpose. I let go of the chair. Later that evening, needing a glass of water, I came to the top of the stairs, and I heard a conversation in the kitchen. My voice lost all softness. It became clear, precise, a librarian stating facts. It was not a conversation about grief. It was a conversation about square footage, about market trends, about whether to list this house as is or invest in renovations before the sale. The room did not move. The air seemed to solidify. Marcus's smile froze, then crumbled. Chloe's hand dropped from his arm. I heard the words, "significant asset." I heard the phrase, "probate avoidance." I heard my son ask if they should talk to me about renovations to increase the value. I recited the quotes flatly, without inflection. This was the night of my diagnosis. A low murmur started, then died. People glanced at Marcus and Chloe, then back at me. "In the weeks that followed," I went on, my posture now fully erect, the shawl feeling suddenly ridiculous around my shoulders, I observed. I canceled my book club. I let my garden wilt. I asked for help with my will. "And you both," I said, looking directly at my son and his wife. "You were so helpful, so efficient. You brought a contractor. You discussed comps and value adds in my living room. You suggested boxing up my china to keep it safe. You measured my life in profit margins." "Mom," Marcus choked out, his face pale. I held up a hand, not a trembling one, but a firm, halting gesture. "I am speaking." The authority in my voice silenced him completely. It was a tone I had not used in decades, not since he was a child caught in a lie. I was faced with a choice. I could die heartbroken, knowing my legacy was seen as a liquidation event. Or I could use the time I was given, the 6 months, for another purpose. I turned my body slightly to address the whole room. I returned to Dr. Thorne. I did not seek a second opinion. I proposed a collaboration. I asked him to help me use the diagnosis, not as a death sentence, but as a lesson plan. All eyes swung to the back of the room where Dr. Thorne stood, his expression solemn but calm. "The prognosis you have all been mourning," I said, my voice now strong, filling the silent space, "was a fabrication, a mutually agreed-upon fiction. I am not dying, Dr. Thorne." He took one step forward. Every head turned. In his practiced professional voice, he said, "Eleanor is in excellent health. Her most recent comprehensive tests, completed last week, show no evidence of any terminal or progressive illness. Her vitality is remarkable for her age. The original conditional prognosis was based on presented symptoms that, upon further observation and testing, have not manifested as any clinical disease." A glass slipped from someone's hand, Cousin Gerald's, I think, and shattered on the hardwood floor. The sound was explosive in the silence. No one moved to clean it. Chloe's face was a mask of utter shock, then dawning horror, then a hot, furious blush. Marcus stared at me, his mouth slightly open, his eyes wide with a confusion so profound it looked like physical pain. You lied?" he finally whispered, the sound carrying. "I conducted an experiment," I corrected him, my voice cold and even. "I presented you with a scenario of ultimate vulnerability. I gave you a time frame in which to reveal your priorities. And you did. With stunning clarity. You saw an end and began dividing the spoils before the breath had left my body. This gathering today was not my final goodbye. It was your final examination, and you have failed." The room erupted into a chaos of sound, gasps, exclamations. My brother Albert said, What's happening?" loudly, and his daughter Kara shushed him, her own face stunned. Letitia was crying again, but now from a different, more complex shock. My library friends looked between me and Marcus with dawning understanding and disapproval. "How could you?" Chloe shrieked, finding her voice. It was strident, angry, devoid of any pretense now. "This is monstrous, a trick, to humiliate us." "I did not trick you into measuring my curtains, Chloe," I said, my words cutting through her outburst. "I did not trick you into discussing my kitchen resale value over salmon canapes. I did not trick you into seeing my home as a stepping stone to a better postcode. You did that yourselves. All I did was provide the quiet to listen and the time to watch." Marcus found his voice, a broken, ragged thing. "You let us believe. You let us grieve. You were not grieving." The words shot from me, sharp and cold, the first true flash of my contained anger. You were planning. The grief was a performance for my benefit, and the moment you thought I was out of earshot, you dropped the act. I did not hear grief in that kitchen. I heard a business meeting. He flinched as if struck. His shoulders slumped. He looked at the floor, at the scattered pieces of the broken glass, anywhere but at me or the ring of accusing, astonished faces of his family. The curtain had fallen. The performance was over. The truth stood in the center of the room, healthy and furious and utterly in control. The silence that followed my last statement was different from the one before. It was not respectful. It was stunned, heavy with the weight of a shattered narrative. They had come for a farewell, and instead they were witnessing a trial, and the verdict was written on every face, in every pair of eyes, fixed on Marcus and Chloe. The stunned silence held for a 5 count before it shattered into a dozen separate conversations. I did not raise my voice. I simply waited, standing straight in the center of the room until the noise subsided out of a need to hear what I would say next. The power had irrevocably shifted. I was no longer the frail matriarch. I was the judge. "I understand you are shocked," I began, my voice calm, pedagogical. "You came for a farewell and found an intervention. Let me be clear about my motives. This was not done for cruelty, it was done for clarity. Chloe found her voice again, sharp with indignation. Clarity. You lied to your entire family. You manipulated us. I observed you, I corrected again, patient but firm. You manipulated yourselves. The diagnosis was a lens. It magnified what was already there. It revealed priorities. I watched my son and his wife transform from grieving relatives to estate managers in the span of a week. I listened to discussions of contractors and comps where there should have been discussions of comfort and care. The lens was false, but the image it revealed was true. I turned my attention to Marcus. He still could not meet my eyes. You asked how I could let you grieve, but you must ask yourself, what were you grieving? The impending loss of a mother or the impending responsibility of an inheritance? Your tears in this living room were real, I believe that. But your actions in my kitchen were more real. They revealed your values under pressure, and those values were about property, not person. Aunt Agnes, my library friend, spoke up, her voice quiet but carrying. What will you do now, Eleanor? Now, I said. I will tell you what I have done. I took a deliberate breath. I have rewritten my will. The previous version, which left everything to Marcus, has been destroyed. A fresh wave of gasps. Marcus's head snapped up, his eyes wide with a new kind of horror. The house, my savings, the proceeds from my investments, the bulk of my estate, are now placed in a trust. The trust has two beneficiaries. One, the establishment of a community garden in the vacant lot on Elm Street. Two, the creation of a literacy program and reading room at the local library to be named for James. The reaction was a mix of soft approval from some and stunned disbelief from others. Letitia nodded slowly, a tear tracing a new path down her cheek. Cousin Gerald looked physically pained. To Marcus and Chloe, I continued, looking at them, I have left a symbolic sum, $10,000 each. It is not meant as support. It is meant as a reminder of what you were so eager to quantify. You can't do that, Chloe exploded, taking a step forward. That's our inheritance. You're punishing us for being practical. I am not punishing you, I said, my voice dropping, becoming even colder. I am redirecting my legacy. You demonstrated that your primary interest in my life was its material conclusion. Therefore, I have removed you from that conclusion. The money you coveted will go to nourish a community and foster a love of learning. Things I value, things your father valued. If you wish to be part of my legacy, you may volunteer at the garden or read to children at the library. That door is open. Marcus finally spoke, his voice hollow. You're cutting me out. No, I said, and for the first time a flicker of old pain showed in my tone. You cut yourself out. You placed yourself on the other side of a transaction. I am merely formalizing the paperwork. The relationship between a mother and a son cannot be inherited. It must be lived. You chose, in my most vulnerable moment, to live as my executor, not my son. He put his face in his hands. His shoulders shook. Whether it was from shame or anger, I could not yet tell. Dr. Thorne moved forward from the archway. For the record, he said, addressing the room, everything Eleanor has said about her health is accurate. She is well. The deception was hers. But I agreed to participate because I have been her physician for 15 years, and I have never seen her more distressed than after overhearing that first conversation. This was an extreme measure for what she perceived as an extreme betrayal of trust. My role was to provide the medical framework. His confirmation settled the last of the factual doubts. The situation was now immutable truth. I addressed the whole family again. The rest of you, my brother, my niece, my cousins, my friends, you will find specific personal items left to you in the will. Things I thought you would appreciate, not because of their monetary worth, but because of their connection to our shared history. That is the legacy I choose to leave. Memory, not merchandise. The party was over. The purpose of the gathering had been achieved, catastrophically. People began to move, awkwardly, unsure of protocol. Some came to me, not with pity now, but with a new, cautious respect. Letitia hugged me, a real hug, and whispered, "I'm so sorry, Aunt Ellie, for everything you heard." Others shuffled toward the door, casting conflicted glances at Marcus, who remained statue still, and at Chloe, who was furiously gathering her purse and coat, her face a storm of humiliation and rage. "This is unconscionable," she spat at Marcus, not at me. "Are you just going to stand there?" He didn't answer her. He lowered his hands and looked at me. The confusion in his eyes was clearing, replaced by a devastating, dawning comprehension. He was not looking at his inheritance anymore. He was looking at his mother, and he was seeing the damage he had caused. It was the first sign of the lesson taking root. "We're leaving," Chloe announced to the room as if she were in charge. No one responded. She stalked out, the click of her heels on the floor like gunshots in the quiet. Marcus did not follow immediately. He took a step toward me, then stopped. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible shake of his head, then turned and walked out after his wife, his steps slow and heavy. The reckoning was not in the shouted accusations or the legal changes. It was in that silent, shame-filled exit. The courtroom had adjourned. The sentence had been delivered. Now we would all have to live in the world it created. The silence after the door closed behind Marcus was different from any quiet the house had ever held. It was not peaceful. It was charged, like the air after a lightning strike, cleansed but scarred. I stood in the center of the living room, surrounded by the remnants of the party. Half-empty glasses, crumpled napkins, the shattered glass still on the floor. The caterers had left discreetly during the final revelations. I was alone. I fetched the broom and dustpan. I swept up the shards of crystal, the sharp tinkling sound, the only noise in the house. I methodically cleared the plates, wrapped the uneaten food, wiped the surfaces. The physical work was a relief. It grounded me. With each cleared item, I felt the persona of the dying woman slough away, like a heavy costume I had worn for too long. My back did not ache. My hands were steady. The next few days were a series of phone calls. Letitia called every evening just to talk, her voice a steady anchor of unconditional love. My brother Albert, through his daughter Kara, sent word that he was glad I was well, though he remained confused about the strange party. My library friends invited me for coffee, their curiosity tempered with unwavering support. The extended family, those who had been mere witnesses, processed the information in their own ways. Some were judgmental of my methods but understanding of my reasons. Others, like Cousin Gerald, simply stopped calling. Marcus did not call. Not for a week. I expected this. The shame was a quarantine. Chloe, I learned through the subtle network of family gossip, was furious. She told anyone who would listen that I was a manipulative old woman who had emotionally abused her son. She demanded Marcus cut all contact. I did not know if he would comply. Then, on a Tuesday morning, a letter arrived. It was in Marcus's handwriting. My name on the envelope. No return address. My hands did not tremble as I opened it. Mom. I don't know how to start this. I have started it 10 times. There are no words that can fix what I did, what I said, what I thought. You were right about everything. Hearing you say those words in front of everyone was the most painful experience of my life. Not because you humiliated me, but because I heard my own voice through your ears. I heard how cheap and hollow it sounded. I've been walking around in a fog of numbers and pressure for so long. Mortgage payments, market trends, perceived failures, that I lost sight of what the numbers were supposed to be for. They were supposed to be for building a life, not trading one. I am so ashamed. I looked at you, my mother, and saw a column on a balance sheet. I don't know how to apologize for that. There is no apology big enough. I am not writing to ask for anything. Not the house, not the money. I don't deserve them. I am writing because I need you to know that I see it now. I see you. I am sorry. Marcus. I read it 3 times. The cold, strategic part of my mind assessed it for manipulation, for strategy. I found none. It was raw, inelegant, and rang with a truth his kitchen whispers had not. This was the beginning of the lesson taking root. I did not reply immediately. A letter required a considered response. I waited 3 days. Then I wrote a single line on a plain card and mailed it to his office, not his home. I received your letter. The garden needs weeding. Saturday, 9 a.m. He arrived at 8:55, dressed in old jeans and a worn shirt. He looked older, tired, but his eyes were clearer. He carried no portfolio, no contractor's estimate. He carried work gloves. "Mom," he said, standing on the porch, "the weeds are in the back, by the fence. The trowel is in the shed." He nodded and went to work. We did not speak for an hour. We knelt in the soil under the morning sun, and we weeded. The repetitive, mundane task was a form of communication. He was not here to talk. He was here to do, to be present without an agenda, to engage in a simple act of care for something I loved. After a while, I spoke. "Chloe?" He did not look up. "She thinks I'm a fool. She may be right. But I can't see things her way anymore. Not after this. We're separated. For now." I nodded. I felt no triumph, only a somber acknowledgement of consequence. "The Community Garden Project," he said, his voice tentative. "The trust paperwork. If you need someone to help with the logistics, the permits, I could do that. I'm good with that stuff." He paused. Not for anything. Just to help." "I will let you know," I said. That was the first Saturday. He came again the next week and the week after. We weeded. We planted some late-season bulbs. We repaired a section of the fence. Words were sparse, but they were real. He asked about a memory of his father. I told him. He apologized again for the contractor. I acknowledged it. The relationship was not repaired. It was being rebuilt from the ground up on a new foundation. It was smaller, quieter, more fragile, but it was honest. Letitia visited often. The book club reinstated me with cheers. The house felt like a home again, not a stage or an asset. I took the blue paisley shawl and folded it away in a drawer. I had my lawyer draft a codicil to the will, setting aside a small fund to be released to Marcus in 5 years, contingent on his continued involvement with the literacy program. It was a test and a hope. On a cool autumn morning, Marcus and I were in the garden once more, preparing the beds for winter. The silence between us was no longer charged with betrayal or strategy. It was simply silence, companionable and unforced. He sat back on his heels, looking at the tidy rows of turned earth. "It looks good, Mom." "It does," I agreed. He looked at me then, really looked at me, his eyes holding a complexity of regret, respect, and a tentative, hard-won love. "I'm glad you're not sick." A simple statement, the most important one. "So am I," I said. And for the first time since this began, I felt a smile, a real one, touch my lips. It was not about victory. It was about clarity. The legacy I would leave was not the house or the money or even the garden. It was this, a son, humbled and taught, kneeling in the soil beside his mother, learning the value of things that cannot be sold. The revenge was complete. It had burned away the rot. What remained had a chance to grow.